Greetings, welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Sunday, April 5th, 2026, and today we're diving even further down the rabbit hole of what happens when we die in part 4 of this mini-series. And so today we're going to be looking at what happens specifically to human consciousness, or that sense that we have of ourself, or even our soul, if you will, when we die. Before we do that, though, if you enjoy the content and want to support the Dr. J Vlog series, be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. And share these vlogs with others you think might enjoy the content. We'll see if they might want to join up as well. Okay, so to get started, I want to wish everyone a happy Easter. In the Christian tradition, Easter represents the ultimate expression of hope against despair through the resurrection of Christ. Easter symbolizes the promise of eternal life, the decisive victory over sin and earthly death. The Buddhist parallel might be the human struggle and wandering that are embedded in samsara, where we experience birth and death and suffering as we cling to our personal desires and cravings and attachments. But the way out, or ending the cycle, involves achieving nirvana, a key concept of all major Eastern religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. With enlightenment, individual passions are extinguished to achieve the ultimate state of salvation and release, or liberation from suffering and from the cycle of birth and rebirth. The main difference, I think, between the Christian and, say, the Buddhist traditions would be the presence of an eternal soul in the former, while the concept doesn't really exist as such in Buddhism. But I still think there's a profound connection of liberation embedded in both of these traditions. So for Christians, the liberation comes from being freed from the shackles of our earthly existence, and to be, depending on the tradition you subscribe to, for example, to be reunited with God the Creator, rather than a separate existence here on earth and all the suffering that entails. For Buddhists, it's the liberation from the ego and the passions and desires that sort of keep us stuck in the cycle of birth and rebirth. So the Buddha taught that when nirvana is achieved, Buddhists are able to see the world as it really is, which includes accepting the Four Noble Truths and then being truly awake to reality. And once nirvana is achieved and the enlightened individual then physically dies, the belief is that they'll no longer be reborn, and they're essentially reunited with the oneness of the universe. And so I see a deep value in both of these traditions and their different conceptions of what happens when we die. And I actually hold both of these belief systems, if you will, in my mind's eye and draw upon both for inspiration at various times. I don't claim to have any special insight or ability to evaluate the veracity of religious beliefs as such, and I don't even try. Quite frankly, I just try to appreciate the deeper meanings and wisdom of both traditions and beyond, and what happens to human consciousness as understood in these various religious traditions. But at the same time, I'm also comfortable holding some other ways of thinking about all of this, and from a different perspective other than religion. And so that's the behavioral scientist in me. So what I'm sharing in the mini-series is not meant to challenge religious beliefs in any way. I'm just looking at the world, if you will, through the lens of neuro and social science. That's all. And again, my beliefs and my understanding can change with new information and new insights and breakthroughs. So to that end, I start from the premise that we don't have any evidence of consciousness existing independently of the physical substrate or after brain death. And that's a difficult thing, I think, for many people to accept. In our culture, we like to believe that the I who exists now should continue to exist forever, and perhaps will ultimately be reunited with our loved ones in heaven, etc. And by the way, if that does happen, great. I just don't have any specific evidence to confirm such a possibility, and that's why people talk about having faith. By the way, I can't rule it out either. I just literally don't know. And so I guess beyond the edge of experience and our knowledge of the physical universe, anything's possible. So sure, we can imagine heaven and reuniting with God, or being freed from the cycle of life and death and rebirth. And we can, again, take great comfort in these beliefs. But here's another way, I guess, to think about this and to think about the sense, or try to make sense, I should say, out of what happens in the afterlife. But again, from the perspective of modern physics and neuroscience, mixed in with some philosophical speculation of necessity. So what if the notion, for example, of the block universe accurately describes and explains reality? So a century ago, Minkowski introduced the concept of four-dimensional space-time, building on Einstein's theory of relativity. So the block universe theory then suggests that the universe exists as a four-dimensional space-time continuum. And as such, past, present, and future sort of all exist simultaneously based on a kind of fixed eternal geometry that's always existed. It's not that time is an illusion, but rather the idea is that time and space are actually woven together and create the fabric of the universe. And again, they're sort of woven together and within which all of the different forms of matter and energy exist. Quick side note, some of you will know that Dan Fogelberg is a personal musical muse of mine. And yet it took me over 4 decades to finally come to understand what he truly meant with the lyrics in his song, from his song In the Passage. Maybe I'll leave a link to that below, where he writes, or he sings, "And in the passage from the cradle to the grave, we are born madly dancing, rushing headlong through the crashing of the days. We run on and on without a backward glance. The places dash and the faces dart like fishes in a dream, hiding neath the murky banks of long-forgotten streams. The lines of life are never long when seen from end to end. The future's never coming, and the past has never been." So in a nutshell, we are born into the universe in our current forms. We're free to dance and to run forward as our lives unfold each day without having to look backwards. And it's all a great, grand, glorious opportunity to experience reality as human beings. That's what you and I are doing right now. But from a broader perspective of eternity and the universe, we know that we are indeed part of something bigger, and that the lines of life are never long if viewed as a whole from end to end. And in the block universe, the future's never coming and the past has never been, like Fogelberg sang. Each moment, though, exists as one part of the whole, representing a specific slice of the bread that's part of the same loaf that already exists. That's one metaphor. Or we can think of the many different individual frames of the universe's film that are spliced together. Again, everything then exists together in that sense. Now, in our daily lives as humans, we have these mental constructs that perceive the passage of time because we see motion and change. And it always seems to be moving forward in the same direction. But what we're really seeing is the process of entropy at work. Okay, at different states that are of the, if you will, in different stages of the film as it's run through the projector, the universe. It's how our minds organize experience and track what we're doing and what we've done and who we are and so much more. In addition, then, there are those who have modified the original block theory to suggest that the past and present are indeed fixed, but the future's still being written. I like that concept simply because it aligns more with our everyday experience of the passage of time. And it leaves open the possibility then of an evolving future and reality based on the flow of matter and energy, which affords then some degree of free will or at least indeterminism in the human condition. So these are the great questions. I don't know the ultimate truth to any of these ideas, and who does, and how can we? But I'm not really troubled by the philosophical uncertainty that's embedded in these ideas. Do we live in the block universe? Do we live in a growing block universe? Or some other kind of universe? Again, I don't know, but here's why I hope we can reach kind of a genuine shared understanding in all of this. I'd hope that we can all agree, for example, that we just shared a moment together, that there's a you out there who's been listening to a me right here, or if we were in a live call-in show, that we might have just had a conversation. So would you agree then that we had these shared moments, that at some level, we've had some kind of a shared awareness of these experiences. And do we not have at least some sense, even through a YouTube video, of having shared real experiences with one another that we could document? So at least one thing is certain. You are alive and you're conscious and you're absorbing information. What you don't know, at least not at this moment, is if I'm still alive. I'm not trying to be morbid or anything or predict or project my own death. My point is simply that this is a pre-recorded vlog. And so I'm a lot like Schrodinger's cat in my sealed YouTube channel, right? I'm simultaneously dead and alive, at least until you definitively have some way to observe and measure me and the wave function collapses. Now, regardless of whether I'm still alive, however, you are here. And in a real sense, then, we've been spending some time together, just like when you watch a movie or you curl up with a good book. Of course, now we've moved on to the next moment, and then to the one after that. But here's the crucial insight. The four-dimensional space-time coordinates of our matter and energy, they come together at every moment. The moments that have just passed, or yesterday, or last year, all of these are quite real. And let me be even more specific. Okay, so on April 5th, 2026, I released this vlog at 7 a.m. And that's 23,335 days since I was born. And that's also the same as saying that it's 3,333 weeks, roughly, since I've been born. Or just over 560,000 hours I spent on this planet, over 500,000. But back in the day, I shared a specific moment of birth when I was born with my mother and whoever else was in the room that day on May 16th, 1962. Now, from the perspective of the universe, not only have 23,335 days passed since I was born, but I'm also located at a vastly different place in the cosmos as well. Yes, still on Earth. But remember, the sun's moving through our galaxy at about 514,000 miles per hour. And at such a speed, the sun travels almost 12.4 million miles each day, or about 4.5 billion miles each year, at least according to our earthly calendar. So that means that I'm about 287,860,560,000 miles from where I was actually born in the universe. A long, long ways away. And again, some 23,335 days removed from that place as well. But the space-time coordinates were quite real when I was born. So to recap, here we are today, almost 288 billion miles away and over 23,000 days removed from the space coordinates of my birth. And I have my birth certificate as partial evidence in that regard. Okay? So, now I was born in Alexandria Hospital on May 16th, 1962. Okay? And so I don't know if you can see that, but here's the evidence in that regard. Okay? See that? Hooray! Okay? But I can never go back there. Right? At least back to the moment of my birth. Back to that specific date and that place. And even if I could somehow, leave the Earth and traverse the 300 billion miles back to where the Earth was when I was born, I'd arrive there at, of course, a very different time, a very different date than my birth date. And I have no clue what I'd find there at this point, or at least where the Earth and the Sun used to be. Probably, most likely, just empty space. Now, alternatively, I can actually also go and visit the specific hospital where I was born today, if I were inclined, because it's still there. And I've actually highlighted it. Okay? See the yellow highlight there? So that's the same place. It's now called, it's no longer Alexandria Hospital, it's the Innova Alexandria Hospital, but guess where it's located? The same place indicated on my birth certificate, 4320 Seminary Road, Alexandria, Virginia. Now, buildings all eventually crumble, but the hospital where I was born almost 64 years ago is still standing. And then, by the way, the birth certificate conveys all sorts of other information. It conveys, for example, that I was born to Patsy Ruth Hannah, who was 32-year-old, white from Texas, and my father was Joseph E. Mikowski, 45, also white from Massachusetts, and he was a special agent with the FBI, and there were 5 other children. I circled the number 5. They're already in the family, among other things. So lots of information on the birth certificate, okay? But again, it's April 5th, 2026, okay? And we continue to race through the galaxy on an Earth that's tethered to the sun. And so while the hospital's still there, I cannot go back to that specific place or date as such, or that spot in the Milky Way, I should say, where our sun used to be on that specific day. The 2 people who conceived me were present that day, but my father died on November 20th, 1988, and my mother died on February 26, 2024. They're both gone, so where are they now? Right? We don't know exactly, right? But yet, here they are. So that's the last picture I took with my father, exactly 3 weeks to the day before he passed. And this is a picture of my mother, roughly a similar age that I am now, a couple of years younger. So that's evidence of mother and father in my life. Our consciousness, of course, experiences reality as a sequential process. We live moment to moment, stringing together something we call our very own lived reality. We all have a unique story in some senses, in that we are a pattern that experiences itself from moment to moment. We don't get eternal life in the sense of never-ending moments in our current configurations. We get, again, as I said in the last vlog, if we're lucky, maybe 100 years of being in this particular film, in this form, as we continue our life journey. And every moment that we've ever lived has been preserved in the geometry, I think, of space-time. Time doesn't erase the past. It's simple. It puts a kind of geometric distance between our experiences of reality. And thus, we can still remember so many moments, and we can document them through the words and the writings, through photographs like I just shared, and videos, and so on. Okay, so then what happens when we die? Where are my mother and father now? Well, they do still exist permanently, I think, in the universe. Even if I develop Alzheimer's, for example, and forget about their names and so on, they still exist. They're part of the store of information contained in the universe, and that can never be taken away. Now, I and we get to enjoy their very being through our memories, through the photographs like I just shared, in our songs, in our memorials, and through the many influences that continue to reverberate so many years later. When I say rats, I'm echoing my father's own voice. Oh, rats. That's also what Charlie Brown used to say. So I'm echoing a couple of figures, historical figures. But again, if you ask me specifically, where are mom and dad now? What happened to their consciousness? Well, to my way of thinking, they exist still at a specific set of coordinates in the space-time continuum. Okay? And I'll always be connected to them in those particular spaces and places and times in which we coexisted as living, sentient beings. We bridge the gap that separates us through our current awareness of matter and energy and information, and acknowledging the space-time coordinates that once existed, like on my birth certificate, like through the photos that remain. But finally, I think they exist, and we all do, at an even deeper level. Consciousness and awareness of some kind, I think, exist whenever information gets integrated into different forms within the universe. And so my parents and their lives are, on the one hand, eternally inscribed into a specific set of space-time coordinates, some of which we got to share with each other over a number of years. And we're forever locked in that particular reality. In addition, though, their bodies have long since vanished from the organic form that used to house their conscious selves. And all of their beingness, their human beingness, has been transformed and dispersed. It's no longer the coherent self that once existed, but rather a more diffuse array of mass and energy that are being recycled constantly in countless ways in the current manifestation of our universe. Again, that's my speculative belief. It's not scientifically provable any more than, for example, the other religious claims that I cited at the outset. But I've arrived at that conclusion nonetheless. That awareness is woven into the fabric of space-time itself. That's my deepest belief. Whether consciousness can exist apart from space-time, well, that'll be determined after this life, quite frankly, and no one honestly knows. And so in the fifth and final vlog, I'm going to discuss the concept of the soul and what we think might happen much more purely from a religious and philosophical perspective. So in the meantime, though, I do find it quite comforting to know that I still live with my parents somewhere within the space-time continuum. And I still carry with me in different ways all of those experiences and memories and that reality to varying degrees. And I'm eternally grateful for the various configurations that once existed that I called my mother and father. And likewise, I'm equally grateful for the configuration that all the configurations that currently exist too. And again, the fact that I can continue to carry my parents, for example, in my mind and in my heart and into the future. Again, I'll address the final question then of our souls from a much more purely religious and philosophical perspective in the final vlog of this mini-series. But until then, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, dole out hugs in abundance, and wishing you all peace.